Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 15th of November. Well, a little modest day yesterday, soft, but you can see already in the post market, they started to turn around from the end of day sort of sell off that took place, and in the soft liquidity, just riding it back up. We've got Magenta really pushing up here at 44, but white corresponding with it. And again, we know what happens when that pivots lower. If it's below the white MBI, we potentially would see some softness and positive extreme wise. Uh, don't have that far down to go, just down to that 39.50 range. Uh, but we're also pushing right up against a previous algo resistance right up there, just above the 4K number. And again, these are the mixed signals that are developing through the change in perception on inflation, what the Fed will do, though the Fed hasn't indicated that they plan to change anything. However, you had so many people positioned in one direction that often creates sharp counter rallies. But as long as you're holding above that 50% level here on the Nasdaq, and that you got real positives. But look at that 55 for a Magenta. Any fade back there could take a little while to get back below the 33. So even if it does pivot lower, you may only just get some modest uh, sideways soft action, which wouldn't be impossible to imagine pending any new developments taking place. Uh, Oil back in the mid range of 80s, which is healthier. It's still elevated artificially from a broader standpoint, but nonetheless uh, not as bad as it was a week ago when things were approaching, getting back up near that 100 range. And again, that can be fluid, and as that changes, it certainly will have its impact. But if it continues to fade, you're certainly getting a softer reaction. The euro is in a power move, obviously, with the idea that the U.S. is going to stop raising rates, and that so far the winter hasn't been catastrophic from a energy standpoint. So, and then as I was pointing out too, though, I think that some of that crypto action and people pulling out certainly had to put into cash monies, and that's definitely been a bonus. But um, back up at the 104 now, another power day up, another penny. It's a pretty significant move, and so it's an indication that they think that the troubles for the eurozone have somehow faded. Still no explanation on what they're going to do about the deficits and things that they're running, and how their central bank is going to do it. But as we've talked about, they're getting huge influx of dollars from the Fed, and as long as that takes place, then it puts less of a strain on getting rid of euros, and sort of becomes a little quiet off book setup that they're able to not create so much of a sell demand for euros back into dollars. And from a treasury standpoint, uh, back over the 97 range, and still has some strength built into where that MBI setup is. And if that's the case, then this indicates the falling rates, and therefore more attractive nature elsewhere, given that the ECB is talking about being, tighter as well and raising their rates. And gold making its move. This is that quiet deviation taking place, and that's been a nice rally from the Magenta pop up, and pretty decent. And it was no surprise, just a question of how long it would take before gold started to respond to the fact that there isn't going to be any change in the deficit spendings or anything from that nature. Bit of stabilization here. Bitcoin dropping all the way down to that 14.9 range, which is just a little higher than where we had from daily way back, that 13.8 or so. Positive extreme, going back from the initial breakout from that 13 range that led all the way to that move all the way up into the 60s. But with this whole FTX thing and what was going on, created quite a strain, and you can see the headlines with that continuing. And what will transpire with that, because obviously there's a lot of links to the Democratic Party and Ukraine and facilitating donations and rumors about whether or not it was just to launder resources from the U.S. government support of Ukraine back to the Democratic Party, since he was a major donor. Unlikely we'll get any answers from any of those questions, because it's just going to fade away. From an ETH standpoint, again, pretty similar. From a reading of the Bitcoin, I think it's a little bit stronger. I think there's just more potentials within the ETH uh, justification. So these may be opportunities to you know, diversify at a more reasonable level. From a 50K standpoint, we can see that we had the DOC spread, which literally started right back before the little peak. We had a brief run, but then once the orange started rising there and steel dipping below cyan, that created the move, and then stabilized fairly quickly with the turnaround that we're seeing right now. And pretty much at parity here, but at any pivot of magenta lower below this 25 level certainly would create a significant amount of selling. Here's what we're seeing from the 5K after the beautiful sell signal that took place right at the peak towards the end of the day, and it proceeded all the way through just to clear out any weak hands, which done beautifully, and supported right off that 39.70 algo, and now we're just above that 39.92 one. A little bit back and forth. It created some resistance initially right there, and pretty clean. I think the whole day represented some really nice action, both to the upside, downside. Um, I'm particularly interested in these setups that take place where we get that sell signal with a really deep dip in the MBI white, and literally waiting for that turnaround move. And when it happens, in this particular case, you still had cyan under red, so there was still some strength built into it. And as soon as DOC spread happened right there, we got the steel turnaround. And didn't take but a couple of bars for that steel turnaround to generate enough momentum to push things back up just a little bit. But pivot below the 25, MBI white leading, even with the sustained attempt to keep it. It was still much weaker shakeout than the previous highs, and as it was approaching, wasn't enough. And that secondary pivot right there, with the white leading, certainly allowed for an immediate entry into that open, and that was a nice move that took place down. And then, of course, the turnaround. You had red leading quite a bit of that, but once it converted, flipped around, you had the nice run going for there, and not that big an action, relatively speaking. So it was quite a muted session when you literally don't have that much spacing between. But I think still that volatility range. You were talking about being, up here at 42. 4017, almost to the 4020, and then dipping all the way back down to 3960. That's quite a bit of activity, volatility wise, within just a short period of time. I mean, it literally was a little over an hour that it took for all that to take place. So, not surprising that they took advantage of that low liquidity to just drive things back up. So, that's what we're going to get more of, the back and forth of the just taking advantage of one side that's overexposed in a direction. And that's literally all we're looking for at this particular stage. We have DOC with cyan under red. So I would expect that's going to give continued strength, and fairly weak from an MBI white. I mean, nothing's happening when you're at that level. So that's the long and the short of it for now. As always, though, look for me on Skype chat. Trade well.